Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. Number the watchers. I never should have taken the night shift at Oak Ridge Surveillance. The pay was great, actually, but some things aren't worth any amount of money. What I witnessed during those 6 months changed me forever. There are things I can't unsee, patterns I can't unfeel, a presence I can't escape. My name is Daniel Mercer. I was 32 when I started the job, divorced, no kids, and desperate for a fresh start. The ad seemed perfect: night surveillance operator, no experience necessary, competitive salary. Quiet work environment. Oak Ridge was a private security firm contracted by various businesses and government facilities throughout the city. My position was simple: monitor feeds from security cameras, report suspicious activity, and maintain logs of everything I observed. The night shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., covering dozens of locations, from empty office buildings to parking garages, from public parks to the exteriors of research facilities. The first month was mind-numbingly boring. I'd watch empty hallways, vacant lobbies, and deserted parking lots for 8 hours straight. Occasionally I'd see a janitor or security guard making their rounds, but mostly it was just shadows and stillness. My supervisor, Harris, would stop by at the beginning of my shift to check in, but otherwise I was completely alone in the monitoring room. The monitoring room itself was a windowless space with 3 walls covered in screens showing various camera feeds. My desk faced these screens, with a computer for logging observations and a phone for reporting emergencies. Behind me was the door to the hallway, and beside that, a small break room with a refrigerator and microwave. It was during my 5th week when I first noticed something unusual. I was monitoring the feed from Westlake Research Facility, a nondescript building that conducted some kind of classified government research. The camera showed the main entrance, a set of glass doors leading to a lobby with a security desk. At exactly 2:17 a.m., there was a brief flickering in the feed. When the image stabilized, something had changed. It was subtle, but I was certain the security guard, who had been sitting at the desk reading a magazine, was now standing near the door, looking outward. I rewound the footage, but there was only static during the transition. One moment he was sitting, the next he was standing. I noted it in my log as a possible camera malfunction and continued my shift. 3 nights later, I noticed something similar on a different feed, this time from the Glenwood office complex. At 2:17 a.m., the same brief static, and when the image returned, a janitor who had been mopping the lobby was now standing motionless, facing the wall. Again, I rewound the footage and found nothing but static during the transition. I mentioned these incidents to Harris the next evening. "Probably just equipment issues," he said with a dismissive wave. "These systems are old, make a note of it, but don't worry too much." But I did worry, because it kept happening. Always at 2:17 a.m., always a brief static, and always someone in the frame changing position unnaturally, and it was spreading to more cameras. By the end of my 2nd month, I was noticing these glitches on at least 5 different feeds each night. And there was something else, something I couldn't quite articulate at first. The people in these frames, after the static, they seemed wrong. Their postures were too rigid, their movements too mechanical when they finally did move. And they always seemed to be looking at something just out of frame. I started keeping a private log, separate from my official documentation. I noted each occurrence, which camera and what changed. A pattern emerged: the anomalies were spreading outward from the Westlake Research Facility, like ripples in a pond. During my 3rd month, I noticed something that sent ice through my veins. After one of these 2:17 a.m. static moments, a security guard at Parkview Plaza turned and looked directly at the camera. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were completely black. He stared directly into the lens for nearly 5 minutes without blinking before turning away. That same night, I rewound footage from previous days and studied it carefully. What I found disturbed me deeply. The people affected by these glitches never left the buildings. They would continue their routines until the end of their shifts, leave the frame, but security logs showed they never checked out. They simply vanished. I considered reporting this to someone above Harris, but who would believe me? I had no proof beyond the static-filled transitions that could easily be dismissed as technical issues. And something told me that drawing attention to my discoveries might be dangerous. Instead, I began researching the Westlake Research Facility. Information was scarce, but I found rumors online about experimental quantum physics research, theories about parallel dimensions, and whispers about a project called Observer Effect. Nothing concrete, nothing verifiable, but enough to feed my growing paranoia. It was during my 4th month that things escalated dramatically. The 2:17 a.m. phenomenon now affected nearly every camera I monitored, and I began to notice something else. Sometimes, just at the edge of a frame, I could see something: shadowy figures, too tall and thin to be human, with elongated limbs and no discernible features. They would appear briefly, always near one of the affected people, before sliding out of view. One night I froze a frame at just the right moment and saw one clearly. It stood at least 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with skin like static on an analog TV. Where its face should have been was just a dark void. And it was reaching toward a janitor who stood rigid, facing away from it. I nearly quit that night, but something kept me coming back, a morbid curiosity, a need to understand what was happening. And perhaps, though I wouldn't admit it then, a growing sense that I was somehow meant to witness this. During my 5th month, I began experiencing strange phenomena myself. I would arrive home after my shift and find things moved from where I'd left them. Nothing major, a coffee mug on a different shelf, my shoes aligned perfectly when I'd kicked them off haphazardly, my computer turned on when I was certain I'd shut it down. And there were the dreams. Every time I managed to sleep, I dreamed of the monitoring room. In these dreams, I would be watching the screens as usual, but then would feel a presence behind me. I could never turn around, no matter how hard I tried. I would be frozen, aware of something standing just behind my chair, watching me as I watched the screens. I would wake gasping, my body drenched in sweat. I began to notice that the cameras in my apartment building's hallways would flicker at exactly 2:17 a.m. as I watched them from my monitoring station at work. I lived in the building I was now watching develop the same pattern. The dread was overwhelming. One night during my 6th month, I arrived at work to find Harris waiting for me. This was unusual. He typically left well before my shift began. "Daniel," he said, his voice oddly flat. "We need to discuss your performance. Is there a problem?" I asked, setting down my bag. "You've been documenting irregularities in your logs, glitches you call them." I felt a chill. "Yes, the 217 phenomenon. I've mentioned it to you several times." Harris smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, the 217 phenomenon, very interesting. The thing is, Daniel, no one else has noticed these glitches." "That's impossible," I said. "They happen every night on multiple feeds." "I reviewed the footage myself," Harris said, still smiling that empty smile. "Everything appears normal, no static, no position changes, no figures at the edges of the frames." My mouth went dry. "That's not possible. I've been documenting this for months." Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. His touch was ice cold. "Perhaps you've been working too hard. The night shift can play tricks on the mind." I looked into his eyes and saw something that made my blood freeze, a flicker of static, just for a moment, and then his eyes seemed too dark, too deep. "I'm fine," I managed to say. "Maybe it was just my imagination." Harris's smile widened slightly. "Good, I'm glad we understand each other. Carry on with your shift." He turned and left, his movements just a little too smooth, too precise. That night the 217 phenomenon didn't happen. The feeds remained stable, showing empty hallways and bored security guards going about their routines. I began to wonder if Harris was right. Had I imagined everything? Had months of solitude and monotony caused me to see patterns that weren't there? But at 3:33 a.m., something new happened. Every screen in the monitoring room went black simultaneously. I checked the system, but there was no indication of a power failure or system crash. Just darkness. Then, one by one, the screens came back on, but they weren't showing the usual security feeds. Instead, each screen showed the same image, my empty apartment. Different angles, different rooms, but all my apartment. And in each feed, standing motionless in various locations, were the tall, static-filled figures I had glimpsed at the edges of frames. They were in my home, waiting. The phone on my desk rang, making me jump. With a trembling hand, I picked it up. "Do you see us now, observer?" The voice was like static given form, like the sound of television snow compressed into words. "We've been watching you watch us." I slammed the phone down and backed away from my desk. Every screen still showed my apartment, still showed the figures standing motionless. Then on the central screen, one of the figures turned slowly to face the camera. Where its face should have been, static swirled and formed into a crude approximation of my own features. I ran out of the monitoring room, down the hallway, into the parking lot. I drove home in a panic, only to remember halfway there that home was exactly where they were waiting. I pulled into a gas station and sat in my car, trying to decide what to do. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Harris. "The shift isn't over, Daniel. Return to your post." I turned off my phone and drove to a motel on the outskirts of town. I paid cash for a room and collapsed onto the bed, exhausted and terrified. Sleep eventually took me, and with it came the dream. The monitoring room, the presence behind me, but this time I could hear it breathing. I woke to knocking at my door. Sunlight streamed through the curtains. I had slept through the day. The knocking continued, insistent. "Mr. Mercer, Daniel Mercer," a woman's voice. I approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Detective Sarah Reeves, City Police. I need to ask you some questions about last night." I opened the door to find a woman in her 40s, badge in hand. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside, allowing her to enter. "What's this about? You work at Oak Ridge Surveillance, correct? The night shift?" I nodded. "There was an incident last night. Your supervisor, Harris Coleman, was found dead in the monitoring room this morning." My blood ran cold. "Dead? How?" Detective Reeves consulted her notepad. "The preliminary finding is a heart attack, but there are unusual circumstances. The security footage shows him entering the monitoring room at approximately 4 a.m. He sits at the desk, looking at the screens, and then," she hesitated, "the footage becomes corrupted with static. When it clears, he's slumped over, deceased." "At what time does the static occur?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She checked her notes. "The timestamp shows 4:17 a.m. Of course, the pattern had shifted. "Mr. Mercer, you were scheduled to work last night. Why weren't you there?" I considered telling her everything, the months of strange occurrences, the figures, the phone call. But the words died in my throat as I noticed something behind her, through the motel window, a tall, thin figure standing in the parking lot looking toward my room. "I wasn't feeling well," I said. "I left early." She studied my face. "The log shows you never signed out, and there's no footage of you leaving. The system must have malfunctioned. It's been having issues for months." Detective Reeves didn't seem convinced, but she had no reason to detain me. She left her card and asked me to call if I remembered anything else. After she left, I packed my few belongings and checked out of the motel. I couldn't go home. They were waiting there. I couldn't go back to work. Harris was dead, and I might be next. I needed answers. I drove to the public library and used a computer to research the Westlake Research Facility more thoroughly. Buried in archived news articles, I found something interesting, a story from 3 years ago about a power surge at the facility that had caused a minor incident. The article was vague, but mentioned that several employees had required medical attention for unusual symptoms. Further digging revealed that those employees had later been reported missing. Their families had filed police reports, but the cases had gone cold. No bodies, no evidence of foul play, just gone. I found a photo of one of the missing researchers, Dr. Lena Chen. Something about her face seemed familiar, though I was certain we'd never met. It took me a moment to place it. She had been one of the security guards I'd seen affected by the 217 phenomenon. Not a security guard at all, but a missing researcher, somehow still present in the security footage. As I sat staring at her photo, my phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "We see you, observer." I looked up sharply. Across the library, near the reference desk, stood a tall figure partially obscured by a bookshelf. It was too far away to make out clearly, but I knew what it was. I abandoned the computer and hurried out of the library. In my car, I tried to think. These things, whatever they were, had spread from Westlake. They had affected people, replaced them somehow. And now they were aware of me, watching me. I needed to see Westlake for myself. The research facility was located on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a high fence topped with barbed wire. Security cameras were mounted at regular intervals. I parked a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, using the trees for cover. As I got closer, I noticed something odd. There was no activity. No security guards patrolling, no researchers coming or going. The building stood silent and dark despite it being mid-afternoon. I found a section of fence partially obscured by bushes and managed to climb over, tearing my jacket on the barbed wire. I approached the main entrance, the same doors I had watched for months through the security cameras. The doors were unlocked. I entered cautiously, finding myself in the familiar lobby with the security desk. It was empty, dust covering the surfaces. It looked like no one had been there for weeks, maybe months. But I had seen people here just last night, security guards, researchers, janitors. I moved deeper into the facility, finding laboratories filled with advanced equipment, offices with papers still on the desks, break rooms with coffee cups half full of moldy liquid. Everything looked abandoned, yet preserved, as if everyone had simply vanished in the middle of their day. In one laboratory, I found what appeared to be the central focus of their research, a large machine that resembled nothing I'd ever seen before. It was circular, with a hollow center large enough for a person to stand in. Cables ran from it to various computers and power sources. A plaque on its base read, "Observer Effect Protocol Phase 3. On a nearby desk, I found a journal belonging to Dr. Chen. The final entry, dated 3 years ago, read, "The observer effect experiment has yielded unexpected results. We theorized that quantum particles behave differently when observed, but we never anticipated that the act of observation itself could tear the fabric between dimensions. The entities from the other side are aware of us now. They're watching us through the tears, and I fear they're finding ways to cross over. If you're reading this, stop watching, stop observing." It only makes the tears wider. A noise behind me made me turn. Standing in the doorway was a security guard, the same one I had seen countless times on the monitors. His posture was rigid, his eyes too dark. You shouldn't be here, observer, he said, his voice oddly flat. I backed away. What are you? What happened here? The guard's face flickered, static replacing his features for a moment before reforming. We are the Watchers. You open the door with your constant observation. Quantum reality is malleable. Observation forces probability to collapse into certainty. But what happens when the observation is returned? When the observed begins to observe the observer? I don't understand, I said, still backing away. Your world has rules, physical laws. In our world, reality is shaped by perception alone. You watched us and in doing so gave us form. Now we watch you, and in doing so we reshape your reality. Other figures were appearing behind him now, researchers, janitors, other security guards I recognized from the monitors. All standing too still, all with that same empty look. What do you want? I asked, my back now against the machine. To exist, the guard said simply, in your world with its solidity and permanence. We were formless until you gave us shape through observation. Now we take shapes of our own choosing. I noticed that the machine behind me was humming, powering up. The circular center began to glow with a pale blue light. The door swings both ways, observer, the guard said. You can join us in formlessness, or we can join you in solidity. The choice was made long ago when you first began to watch. I ran. Past the guard, past the other figures that made no move to stop me. Through hallways and back to the lobby, out into the fading daylight. I didn't stop until I reached my car, my lungs burning. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The facility looked different now, lights on, people moving about, normal, as if nothing had happened. That was 2 weeks ago. I haven't returned to work. I received a call from Oak Ridge saying I've been terminated for abandoning my position. Detective Reeves called once more, asking additional questions about Harris, but seemed satisfied with my answers. I've been staying in various motels, never more than one night in the same place. But it doesn't matter, they find me anyway. Every night at 2:17 a.m., no matter where I am, the lights flicker. And when they stabilize, I catch glimpses of them, the Watchers standing in corners behind shower curtains and closets, watching me, waiting. I've noticed changes in myself. Sometimes I catch my reflection moving a fraction of a second too late. Sometimes I find myself standing in rooms with no memory of how I got there. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I look at my hands, I see static instead of skin. They're replacing me bit by bit, the observer becoming the observed. Last night, I woke at exactly 2:17 a.m. to find one standing at the foot of my bed. It was shaped like me now, my face formed in static and darkness. The transition is nearly complete, observer, it said with my voice. Soon you will watch from our side, and I will live from yours. I'm writing this as a warning, though I don't know who will read it or if it will even exist once I'm gone. If you find yourself watching empty hallways and vacant lobbies in the dead of night, pay attention to what happens at 2:17 a.m. And if you see static, look away, because they're watching you watch them. And in that observation, they find their way through. It's 2:16 a.m. now. The lights are starting to flicker. I can feel them gathering around me, these watchers from beyond the tier. My fingers are turning to static as I type these final words. Whatever you do, don't look too closely at the empty spaces. Don't watch the darkness for too long, because something in the darkness is watching back.